just going to open it up and let you direct.
Okay, Ambassador.
Are you familiar with the conference in the Rayburn Building of 5 or 6 years ago on Nagaland?
No, no.
Well, I was invited to be a speaker there. There were about 250 people in the audience. And I said, I don't know anything about Nagaland, but I do know something about Kashmir, having worked on both sides of the line of control since 1997. So I made a big speech on Kashmir and how we were able to bring people together, like we're talking about over the years. And then answered questions and sat down. And it was organized by a woman, her name might have been Springsteen, but she was sort of a lobbyist on behalf of the Naga people. And what happened then was that a couple of months later, I was visited in my office in Roslyn by a Naga delegation of 5 people. I think one was the Prime Minister, another was a Minister of Defense, and several generals that were all track 1 people. And they invited me to set up a branch of my institute for multi-track diplomacy in Nagaland to help reduce the conflict within the country itself. And unfortunately, they didn't have any money, and we didn't have any money, so that never took place. But I learned later that when they returned to Nagaland, that the Indian government took away all of their passports and said you cannot travel abroad again.
Wow.
In their effort to keep things down again. But
No.
I didn't know whether you were familiar with that particular story.
I haven't heard that. That's amazing. It shows sometimes how there can be huge gaps and things that are going on.
Well, you're doing a great job. My congratulations.
Thank you. Grace.
Ambassador John McDonald, it's Grace Collins.
Grace Collins was the one. Grace Collins.
That's right, Grace Collins. You
I'm
got
here.
it.
Grace is here.
What year was it, Grace?
I think that was, well, we had 2. We had one in the Rayburn building and we had one in the Cannon Caucus. And you
Well,
were
you're the one
speaking
who
at the
organized it.
Yeah. You were
did
the
a
one
great job.
You did a great job. It was an honor to have you. We also had Congressman Trent Franks and Congressman Cleaver was not there, but he was a co-supportive. And then the chaplain, Daniel Coughlin. But Ambassador John McDonald did a great job because he was using the story of the bus, right? The peace bus. Yes, the peace
That's right.
bus. And then he did invite us to his office. He helped with all the paperwork to get their visas, and the key leaders did get their visa for 5 years. And they were trying to be open and transparent, so they went to the Indian government and said that they were sponsored to get this training, and then the Indian government revoked their visas. So that's what happened. But
Who was there that came from Nagaland?
General Atom,
Oh yeah, yeah. Atem has been key in the in this process that I've been a part of.
Reverend Shiroto.
Well, Grace did a fantastic job for years trying to bring peace to that part of the world. She should be congratulated.
I have to say, I'm sorry, my throat. But when I first started helping the Nagas, I did not know anything about the internal fighting. And
Can everybody hear? Seriously.
I said when I first started helping the Nagas, I actually did not know anything about what was going internally. And I'm an American, I'm Korean descent, and I used to work for the UN. So my whole modus of operandi was, peace and conflict resolution. But as I got in deeper with the cause, and this was paid by IM, I learned more about the factional fighting. And the more that kept coming, I had a lot of hardship because a lot of the Naga Americans would not support me. They were scared. They were afraid for their own visas, maybe student visas, or what could happen to their families at home. So it was a very, very lonely thing to work on the Hill by myself. And I just kind of said, whatever's going on there is what's going on there. I can't focus on that. I'm going to focus on the awareness of the issue of the fact that they're oppressed and not talk about disunity, but just one voice.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was a very lonely process, but it was more of a PR job.
Yeah.
And because they had negative PR that was written by the Indian government for
Yeah.
so many years in the filings at the Department of Justice, I did a lot of soft marketing campaigns and using Ambassador John McDonald's multi-track diplomacy, talked a lot about just the fact that they're highly educated.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we could do outsourcing there instead of giving the business to
Yeah.
India. The talking about the fact that the Nagas have a lot of oil and natural resources, economic development. I even used, I know this sounds weird, but my cat as a diplomatic mascot. And the reason I did that was because I tried to go to Hollywood, and Hollywood, it's so expensive to get a celebrity to help you. You know, it's millions of dollars. So on YouTube, cat is a very popular search word. There's something like 800,000 cat videos. So my cat got almost 1 million hits. And my cat is more famous than the president of Nagaland. But it worked, this kind of soft marketing campaign. And at that time, I had also made some good contacts with the Korean government. And they were going to help us. And I got a call from the Korean people, very senior level people, telling me that they were stopped by the Indian government because the Indian government said, if you help Grace Collins, she's going to buy guns. And I just laughed because I'm like, I'm promoting my cat. You know, I'm like so away from that even thought of guns. And then another very successful campaign was creating a quilt of the different tribal cloths. And it took almost 3 years, but we got this quilt that talked about the relationship between America and the World War II, our military, fighting side by side. And so now, after 3 years of it being reviewed, the verbiage on the quilt, it is now in the USO office in Langstuhl, Germany, which is the largest army base. So I know those sound really strange, but those two things have actually caused a lot of positive PR.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I can't focus on, you know, the negative,
Yeah.
the fighting. So I was never about that, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I did have a very interesting experience where I was invited. I've also been involved in Burma, Myanmar, for 20 years, 25, there was the U.S. veterans from the Burma, China, India theaters invited me to come and speak. And many of them had been part of the fighting, supporting the British Army, which was mostly made up of Indian civilians that fought the Japanese. In the Battle of Kohima in Nagaland was one of the turning points in World War II. That we don't have any real awareness. I'd grown up in a military family, studied World War II. I didn't even know about the Battle of Kohima, but the battles in Imphal and Kohima were key turning points and defeated the Japanese effort to invade India. And been to those cemeteries in Imphal and Kohima, very, very moving. And these U.S. veterans, they remembered, they knew the Nagas and fought side by side with them.
Well, the British recognized them as great warriors, and they had special units in the British military.
Mm-hmm.
These are the Naga people
Yeah.
during World War II.
I'm wife of. I have a question with regard to the future. You mentioned this train ride.
Yes.
Which year was that?
That was 2000, in 2000. That was really that was the first action of the Naga Civil Society.
What I wonder is, there are of course still people alive who participated in
Oh,
it.
yeah.
So why not have a second train ride in commemoration of the first one in 2015 or
That's an idea.
something like that, so that you revive the old timers and bring on newcomers and do that. The second type of thing you mentioned, economic things. I grew up in Europe, and you know, about 1,000 years of war between France and Germany and so on. I'm from Germany. And what I still marvel at, I was one of the first European civil servants in the European Economic Community, as it was called, what is now the EU. And the impact the economy had, this changing of getting the tomatoes from Italy and the wine from Italy to Germany and the cheese from France to Germany and the German products going to those countries
Yeah.
and so on. It was more these little economic things which bound us. Unfortunately, they added the political layer and then
Right.
the oil layer, and so that's what is difficult now. But you could not do that economic union, take it apart again, because we were used to the Italian wines and they were used to the German products
Yeah.
and the cheeses and so on. So I wonder to what extent is there any way of having some economic, starting small, with even not only from within the country,
Yeah.
but perhaps even with the neighboring
Yeah.
country, just
Yeah, that's a great observation. India right now is growing so fast economically. I mean, it is phenomenal. From what I saw Delhi when I first went there, that you worked up there, it was. And what it is now, it's like two different cities, night and day. And India's got a lot going, and so I think it's that would be something that could be really very positive for everybody.
but also not just India
Yeah.
and Nagaland, but also Nagaland's little neighbors,
Yep,
with
yep.
whom they are not too friendly. Are they?
Yeah, because like I said, the people on this part of India refer to the rest as the mainland, and that speaks about how they feel marginalized. And there is a lot. The Indian government talks a lot about the economic aid that they give to the area, but it's in part because of the conflicts, in part because of corruption, in part because of all kinds of other things. A lot of that is very ineffectively done. So I think that's an area where there could be a lot of development, and with civil society growing, especially the Nagas. But like I say, we're trying to expand that to cross ethnic, religious, state groups, so that it becomes more regional, to find answers that work for everybody. And that's a great. What you're saying is exactly that. One level.
Dan, could you talk to us about gender, in particular women, and how you've seen the role of women evolve in this peace process, and how things have changed over time? I was there 20 years ago, and I was really kind of shocked at how the gender roles, women in particular, seem to be following an ideal of womanhood as something from the Americas of the 1950s or something. I wonder if, how have things changed, and what role have women played in this process?
Yeah, some of that can be also the impact of the missionaries. If you want to see what 1950s Baptist worship looks like, go to Nagaland. You'll hear hymns that I haven't heard since I was a kid. But there's also some very progressive folks. And I think when I look at gender issues in all my travel, I find that there are some every society almost, issues of the repression of women in some way is going on, but there can be ways where even in those societies they can be way ahead of us in other parts. I mentioned about way back in the day, before the missionaries came, the Nagas were headhunters, and some of the guys will talk about that. It's like with kind of this wistfulness. It's like, we were really tough guys back then. We were headhunters, and they even have shelves with skulls. I haven't seen them, but my wife has. I was sick the day they went to the headman's house and saw all the skulls on his shelves, from way back. But in the headhunting days, it was the women who would go between the villages and make peace. And so they had this tradition of women activists who would step into the conflicts and do things. And so there was a group called the Naga Women's Association that was initially started by one of the chief minister's wives, and it's kind of a time to drink tea and kind of the women VIPs getting together and socializing. And But then they started going to the Indian Army bases to pick up the bodies of Naga young people who had been killed, and they would bury them. I think some of them wrap them in shawls at the time. There were new shawls in some of the cultures there. And so, that's one thing if you're doing it once or twice, but they were doing it 12, 14 times a week, 14 bodies picking up, and the next week, more and more and more and more. And that mobilized them. It radicalized them. And they began getting active in going to the various factional camps and going to the Indian government and back and forth, calling for peace. And they've played a key role in the civil society group. And there's been some other Naga groups. That the government of India has established the what's called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And the states of Nagaland and Manipur are under that act. It's basically martial law. And any private soldier can commit a crime against a citizen of Nagaland or Manipur, and there's no legal recourse. And it's been one of the biggest human rights issues in India to deal with, and many of the human rights groups have been trying to take that on. The government of India has various ways of kind of responding to it, but it's interesting, there's more violence in Assam than there is in Nagaland, yet Assam is under regular rule, dealing with things as police issues and kind of dealing with security that way. But in spite of almost 15 years now of ceasefires, and there's been no lifting of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. In Manipur, there's in the center of the city of Imphal is this huge compound. It's about almost a mile square, it was the old king's palaces there, and some key Hindu temples and things like that. During World War II, it was used as an Allied headquarters, and the Indian Army occupied the whole place. And about, when was it, 3 years ago? No, longer than that. Maybe it's 5 or 6 years ago. A woman was kidnapped, was taken from the streets by the Indian soldiers and raped in the compound and thrown back out. And so women from Manipur stripped and stood naked with a big banner that said, "Go ahead and rape us," right in front of the Indian Army post. That brought so much attention to this forgotten place and so much shame that eventually the Indian government returned that whole place, which nobody in their lifetime had been inside, except Army personnel. They've turned it over to the people of Manipur. There's still a tiny, tiny military kind of post inside, but the vast amount of it's like an open park and historical museum and all kinds of things, and you can just walk inside. If you're an outsider, you have to pay a fee, but citizens of Manipur can go right in. And but I was in it was either in Delhi or Calcutta somewhere, and it was the 20th anniversary of one of the major papers in India that's in English. And I got that paper, and that story of the Manipuri women was one of the top stories in that 20-year history, as they were, and this is not from the Northeast, this is from the mainland that they were looking at telling. So women have played a key role as human rights activists. There's also a woman named Sharmila who, you got something about?
It's the New Economist from this week, I think, or last week. It's the Economist, 9th of March. There's a whole article.
Yeah, after
Shamila and her hunger strike.
Yes, she after a human rights violation that took place, she began a hunger strike to force the end of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and referring to Gandhi, Gandhi's hunger strikes. The government arrested her for incitement or something like that. I forget exactly what the cause was. And they have been force-feeding her intravenously. And is now, it's something like 10 years that she has been...
12 or 13.
12 or 13. And so she's been in the hospital. She's been released a couple times and would immediately start it again. Then she'd get rearrested, put back in the hospital. And so she's she's the figure. She's to the people of Manipur like Aung San Suu Kyi was in Burma. Kind of that voice, that figure. There's been other things that women have done, sometimes violent. Women vigilantes about drunkenness, kind of beating drunken men, and things like that. So they're not all what people who are concerned for nonviolence would support. but there is this strong activist side, but there's also a huge amount of domestic violence. In fact, we did some, my wife has been with me, and she's done a lot of things, and domestic violence was one of the number one issues that we were dealing with. So there's, again, it's a very mixed picture, but some very courageous
You know
women.
that in every speech I make, I say the women are the peace builders.
Yeah.
I've been to 103 countries, and they've said that in every country. It's the
Yeah.
women who get it first,
Uh-huh.
because they're the ones that get raped and beat up, and
Yeah.
kids get hurt, and they are the peace builders in every country in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So back in the back, and then to Syngman. So, yes.
Thank you. I'm very much enjoying learning about the work you've done. And what occurred to me as I listened to your description of the intra-Naga conflict and then the Indian-Naga
Right.
conflict, I'm interested in how have you navigated your role regarding the Indian-Naga conflict, given your deep connections with the Naga.
Right.
Do you also have connections with the Indians, or do you have, how do you
Right,
negotiate
right.
your role?
That's a good question. I've been very careful to articulate that I am not a partisan for the Nagas, that I'm a partisan for a just peace. And that means everybody needs to be involved, and it needs to be mutually, my goal is something that's mutually acceptable to people. Sometimes in that quest for just peace, people need to be able to use nonviolent means of resistance or nonviolent means of engaging in the struggles for justice and finding their voice. I've sought to be transparent and open and not to hide what I'm doing. So far, I've not had a problem with that, and I would be delighted to talk with anybody. India views it as an internal affair, and so I've not been welcomed or invited into the mediation process, and so we were involved in trying to equip from the Naga side how to positively engage in that process as part of moving away from a military approach. And I hope that India would see that as a positive thing. And again, we've not tried to hide anything, and be willing to talk with them. I've been doing similar things in Burma. Was involved from '89 to '92 as the only non-Burmese citizen on the Burma Peace Committee that was mediating between ethnic insurgent groups and the government. And one of the things I said, I'd be willing to do conflict transformation workshops with the Burmese military if they were interested in it. But so far that hasn't happened. But we did have conversation. We did have communication with them. They again didn't want us. They didn't want me involved. And later I was involved, kind of coordinating an international group of peace mediators and folks like that that supported that process. And so some of you may know. No, getting old. My name. John, what's John's last name?
John Sankers.
No, it's John McConnell from Bradford University in the UK, Quaker. John and I kind of led things, and we had some direct communication with the military junta, offering to have conversations with them about how these processes might go. And they never met with us, but they knew who we were. And and I've been able to get to Burma many, many times since then. They know who I am. So I think, one of the things Gandhi was very strong about too was being transparent, being above board. That can be a key thing. There are some people who, in some situations, won't want to go that way, and I understand, appreciate that. But I think in the role that I was playing, transparency for everybody has been really key, and that I'm an advocate for a good process, and a process that everybody can enter into, that ultimately that's going to be the best for everybody involved. Wait, I said I was going to go to Singh Miller next.
Can you mention a bit more about the power asymmetry between the Nagas and the Indian government as well? That is actually the fact that it's affecting the peace talks itself. And it has been going on for more than 15 years, but we don't see any concrete solutions as such. So apart from building a civil society group, do you think that we need a stronger third-party kind of intervention to...
Good question. When we do a lot of... go ahead.
And one more point is how the Nagas also got pretty divided. Was the state did play a role in that? The state, the government itself...
Government of Nagaland?
No.
State? No,
The
government of
Indian
India.
government
Okay.
itself, yeah, played a role in dividing the Nagas itself. And I think it would be good if you mention a bit also about how they were divided up and merged with other communities for the easier administration, and how that is affecting the...
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try to tell this as objectively as I can. There's going to be, some of the Naga political leaders would tell it more from their perspective and stronger. So I'm going to try to tell it as kind of an objective outsider as much as I can. The goal of the Indian government, and it's an understandable goal, the U.S. has had the same goal for itself, is to maintain its territorial integrity. So part of the Naga question is, well, should we have even been a part of that territorial integrity? We declared our independence before India did, so there's, that's an issue at stake. But from the Indian government, that's kind of how they see that. In the 60s, and I haven't studied it in great detail, but in the 60s, as a part of a peace process to try to give both to give some sort of political status to the Nagas, but also at the same time to limit that and water it down. They did something that we're very familiar with in the U.S. I know that we do it in Michigan, where I live, and that's called districting, where whoever's in power will do the districts for the congressional seats to maximize their party's benefit and minimize others. Well, the government of India did that by drawing the lines, the state lines. That whole region was called Assam at one time. So they created the state of Nagaland, which is heavily Naga, but there's also lots of Nagas in Manipur, and they got put in another state. There was Nagas in what's now part of Assam, also in Arunachal Pradesh, and of course Burma, which the Indian government didn't have anything to do with, but the British had done. And so one of the key issues at stake, and is going on right now, is how do the Naga people come together? And you see this in other places like Kurdistan and Kurdish people. They didn't have anything to do with drawing those lines. And so how do you go back with the history and with all the institutions that have been created and all the political vested interests that get built up? How do you go back and redraw these? Because it becomes something that can be very, very dangerous. And occasionally you'll see somebody like Czechoslovakia doing it peacefully and breaking up the country. But other times you see things like Yugoslavia where it's horrendous what happens. And so how are we going to do this in the Northeast? It's a big question. And right now, one of the things that they're looking at is how can there be perhaps different and overlying areas of sovereignty where the government of India and the states might have certain powers, but then the people groups might have, that cross those lines, might have other powers. And that's one of the things that's under discussion right now between the Naga political leaders from the Isak Muiva group who are meeting with the government of India. The question is whether that'll be enough for people. And even if that's accepted, whether, say, like the government of Manipur would accept it, you know. So right now, the government of Manipur and the government of India are in serious conflict with each other, which is fascinating to see. And I'm not sure where this is going to go. One of the things historically that's been going on that I think is true for any situation, and we do simulations, and you know the prisoner's dilemma game. I do a lot of playing that out. In fact, I've had some very interesting examples of playing that game. We call it the red-blue game. There's all kinds of different things, but it's basically to try to help people. You know, if you're in a conflictual win-lose kind of relationship, it can deteriorate so everybody loses. And so you have to take risks to find the win-win approach, and you actually benefit if you do that. But it's highly risky because if the other side doesn't want to go, you know, then they can pound you. And so one of the things that comes out is that if somebody's in a dominant position and there's no balance of power, it's like, why do we need to negotiate with you? We're doing great, thank you. We'll just keep there. And so one of the challenges is how can you get the dominant group to begin to pay attention to the needs of those who are at the margins. And that's, violence is often used as one of those ways, Well, you'll pay attention, damn it, if I fly a plane into the Pentagon and into the World Trade Towers, if I blow up a bus or a pizza parlor, you'll pay attention then. And so violence becomes a way to get attention. I think that ends up becoming counterproductive. And we, in a lot of our training, we explore those kinds of issues about how violence many times ends up, you're worse off than when you started. And I challenge that with the Nagas. They've been fighting since 1955. And say, well, how's that? What is it, Dr. Phil? How's that working for you? And so the challenge, and this is what I say to a lot of people, can we hold nonviolence to the same standard that we hold violence? Or flip it around the other way. Can we hold violence to the same standard we hold nonviolence? People engage in a nonviolent struggle for a year, and if they don't get their objectives, they say, well, that didn't work. But when has people adopted violence, and after a year they say, well, that didn't work, let's throw it aside. We need to, of course I come also with it as a value question, but setting that aside and just being pragmatic, it's like we need to have that kind of thing. So are there nonviolent ways that we can change this power balance? And I think that's one of the things that started happening with the journey of conscience, is that we started using nonviolent ways. So it wasn't just the people with the guns who were the advocates for the Naga cause, but there were all these other folks that were advocates for the Naga cause. And not only that, they were making alliances with Indian civil society folks that had the values of human rights and these kind of concerns. And so these alliances became something where there was then, you would have former military officials who had been in the Northeast, carrying out operations in Nagaland or Manipur, and now they're speaking out about that. And so the former enemies become allies in the process of trying to find a just and negotiated settlement. So you'll never get complete things, but if you can start shifting that, then it becomes something where the other side then has a vested interest in a peaceful solution. And I think India has so many different conflicts going on that if they can solve this conflict, it's been a disaster for India too. Indians have died. Indian resources have gone down the drain, and they've got so many other issues that if they can solve the conflicts there in a way which they feel doesn't imperil their identity and integrity, then it becomes a win for India. So I think India's begun also seeing that they have some things to gain, and so I think for both sides to come to that kind of a recognition it's a long journey, but India has played the role of divide and conquer as many powers do. I won't mention any other names, but that play one side off the other. And in fact, I have files, big files from Isaac Amuiva's group, from Kaplang's group, each accusing the other of taking arms from India. I have no idea what's true, but I do, know that those accusations are floating around, and I'm sure they've been stoked by actual things going on, and so it adds to the divisiveness and the hostility, and so it becomes, as a peacemaker, a part of trying to untangle and unpack it. If the Nagas are going to come together, how do they deal with that, and how do they protect themselves together about that divisiveness? That was one of the things the civil society had to do. Is we're going to hear things. We don't know where these rumors are coming from. Are they coming from Nagas? Are they coming from India? The suspicion level is so high, and I don't know.
I remember that after I heard the different speakers, India is a really country of extreme.
Well, I'm not going to say that, okay? Because a part of the thing in Peacemaker, I think, is that you got to be careful how you speak about the other side. They can speak about that to each other, but if I'm going to play a role, I have to be careful how I speak about it.
If I could put this in a broader context, what you're talking about, you've got to realize that the Charter of the United Nations is based on national sovereignty. And the whole world is based on national sovereignty. The problem today is that the 40 ethnic conflicts around the world are all within the nation-state system.
Yes.
And so we're not organized as a world to recognize that we have to shift because of national sovereignty.
Yes.
The best example of that is Bashir in Sudan. In Darfur there was genocide and nobody could do anything about it because he said, I'm in charge, you can't come in.
Yep.
So national sovereignty is still supreme, and we haven't designed a way yet to figure out at that governmental level how to make changes within the borders of a country.
Yeah. Sharmila, you wanted to follow up, and then we'll go back to you.
Mine is actually, when I talk about power asymmetry, I'm talking more at the peace talks level. Like, there's a power asymmetry, obviously, between the Indian government and the Nagas that are having the talks. So what I'm saying is, apart from building the civil society group, do we need a third country kind of? Like, do you think it's time, because the conflict has been going on for 8 decades?
The Nagas have wanted that. Yes, the Nagas have wanted that, but India has refused that because of saying it's an internal conflict. One of the things we did to address that asymmetry between India and the Nagas at the peace talks was to do that training in negotiation skills, so that Isaac Amuiva could more effectively engage in negotiations. So providing skills, because if you don't know how some of these conversations take place, you can be easily manipulated, and so how can they participate in a positive way? So that was one thing we could do. We've offered various NGOs and sometimes you will see that, but so far that hasn't happened. But as the ambassador was saying, there is, I think, with the ending of the Cold War, when in the Cold War all these small conflicts became global battlefields. With the ending of the Cold War, the conflicts are still there, but now they're internalized, and nobody wants outsiders coming in. So it's like the U.S. comes, we'd be glad to help mediate. And it's like, okay, what's the secret agenda here? How's the U.S. trying to play this politically? Because we know that they're not in this out of generosity and all that. They got some sort of angle.
With Detroit?
Yeah, we deal with it there. We just got an emergency financial manager. And so what's happening, back in 1992, I wrote, 2 books came out. My book, Christian Peacemaking from Heritage to Hope, and then this book, Religion, the Missing Dimension of Statecraft, edited by Douglas Johnston and Cynthia Sampson. This came out of Washington think tanks. Got Jimmy Carter to do the foreword. Jimmy Carter wouldn't do my foreword. We did ask him. But mine was out of the religious thing. And it's interesting, we tell the same story, but from 2 different perspectives. And it was interesting to me that Henry Kissinger, I hope he's not a saint for any of you here, but I think of Henry Kissinger as this kind of arrogant, we've got this under control, we know what we're doing, butt out. And Kissinger says, a thoughtful collection of first-rate essays on the topic of increasing importance in contemporary world politics. And it's about this second-track diplomacy, about, in this case, religious figures being key players in mediating these conflicts and becoming, they're the trusted folks in many situations. And so how can we recognize that? Somebody was talking about money, and that's become a key issue for me, because all these things, where do they get funded from? It comes from individuals and small groups, churches sometimes, and just people who believe in it. And when I tried to get funding for the Burma process or for the Naga process, there was not a single foundation that would fund us. And they would fund academic research about the process, but they wouldn't fund the work of trying to do it, because you can work, like I've been working 16 years with the Nagas, and we've actually started to get some things we can say we've accomplished something, but I couldn't do that in a year report. It's a lot longer process. So I think that becomes a structural issue about how do we fund this second track diplomacy that basically it's coming out of just people being committed and working, whether it's religious or non-religious NGOs, educational NGOs. It's just a lot of people working at it, and they're doing great work. But that's a problem.
So we had one more question, I think, from Kristen. I saw your hand a while ago. And then
also Susan.
Wrap up the formal portion of this and give people a chance to have a few more one-on-one conversations and grab each other. We have the room for a little longer. You can also have a chance to purchase books at that point, if that works for you, so that we can close down the formal bit. But Kristen, I know you have your hand up a lot.
I just had a quick question about when you first started working in this region, how you established trust and established yourself as a practitioner and got the
with the Nagas, it was because I was a Baptist, and I was walking into a history of that I had done nothing to prepare, but that revered Baptist mission folks, and so I actually had an experience that I was telling Singh Mil about back when I was in Valley Forge, we were dealing with the wars in Central America, and I got involved with a woman named Helen Delano, who was accompanying Salvadoran refugees from Honduras back to the villages, and my wife had Helen speak to our peace group, and then I got to know her husband, Bob Delano, and they'd said something about being missionaries in India, and I didn't know who Nagas were. I had never heard the word Naga in my life, and they must have said it, but it just one ear out the other, you know, and so our relationship had nothing to do with the Nagas. So I was in one of the early rounds of peace talks with Isaac Amuiva, and it was very difficult, very, very difficult. A lot of pounding the table and very, very tense discussions. And so we were in Bangkok, and we went out to eat at a local restaurant for lunch, and they, you know, Isaac is an evangelist as well as a insurgent leader. And he was talking about the American Baptist missionaries. We're so grateful for them. You know, we were headhunters before the American Baptist missionaries came, you know, and now we're soul winners and all this kind of stuff. And I'm saying, and he asked me if I knew any missionaries. And I said, well, you know, I did know some missionaries to India. I have no idea where they were, but Bob and Helen Delano. And everybody and the whole table got silent. And Isaac goes, "You knew Bob Delano?" And then he told me the story. When the missionaries were expelled by the government of India, Helen went home. They had some young children. She went home to the U.S. Bob stayed, went underground. And this was when, you know, it was just torched earth kind of things and people starving. And he said, these are the people that I was called to minister alongside. I can't leave them in their hour of travail. He eventually got caught by the Indian Army and thrown out of the country. But he was a hero to the Nagas. And so because I knew Bob Delano, the whole nature of the conversation completely changed. And what did I do? I didn't do anything. And so you know, who knows how some of those things go. And I think one of the things that's, I think, very, very important is to be completely disarmed, if you will, in spirit, and that you know, when I go, I don't go as an American, and sometimes that you know, is an issue I have to deal with. I was in Lebanon doing some things, and you know, it's like this was right after the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and there's, you know, graffiti about this was bought by the U.S. on the ruins and things like that. And I'm teaching Arab students conflict transformation, and so you know, we sometimes have to do that kind of thing. And so I think to come with an open mind, to listen to people, to hear their stories, to respect the suffering that they've gone through, and to not try to get defensive, but to say, you know, I'm here for just peace, and you know, it's not peace that's keeping everything calm for the superpowers, but peace that is rooted in the experience of justice and the owning of the process by everybody involved, and as that, you know, so that's part of it. It can be an issue. Last question, I think, if that's all right,
Yeah.
since you've been waiting.
I had a question about the younger generation of the Nagas and the intra-Naga dispute. Do the Nagas have integrated schools so that the different tribes and communities go to school together? And the reason I'm asking that is, I know with the Good Friday Peace Accords, one of the reasons everyone believes that the Good Friday Peace Accords held is because the women who got involved in saying we really want to have integrated schools so that Catholic and Protestants have to go to school together so that they know each other as children and that they can't be just the other. So the way you told me, though, that the Naga lines, the district lines have been drawn, it probably makes it unlikely that they go to the same schools, but have they thought about that?
You may be able to say more than I. There's regions which are tribal in the rural areas, but you also have the cities. You know, kind of urbanization is happening up there. So you got places like Kohima and Dimapur, the cities, and the schools are in English, and so the churches tend to be more divided. You know, where you got your Ao Church, your Angami Church, your Chakasan Church, etc.
Here, I think what he has focused a lot is on the dynamics of the factional groups and the people that are taking the movement forward. But as Naga as such, there's no division in it. Obviously, there are like some communities, okay, there's a bit of dynamics in that, but it's not much. But since the Nagas have been divided and placed with different communities and states, there's a conflict with that. Like if it's not, Nagas are placed in 4 states in India. So it's just one state which is called Nagaland. That's only the land like where the Nagas are. But there are other 3 states where the Nagas are. So when all these talks are taking place, the resistance comes from there, and the division is more with the other communities than the Nagas.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think what he has focused a lot is on the political groups that are trying to present.
Well, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank all of you.
wonderful. And we do have